Hello, I'm Paul Peters from the University of McGill, and my particular specialty is the poet Heinrich Heine. The relationship of Heine to Orientalism is quite unique because he was a Jew and a German at the same time, in a period in the early 19th century when the question of whether one could be both, a Jew and a German, had become very acute. And so Heine was forced to convert to Christianity for reasons of professional advancement, as he thought, but always retained a sense of difference, or that there was something about his identity which could not be subsumed under the guise of Germanness, as German as he always and very emphatically remained. So I find the extraordinary thing about Heine is this, how he wrestles with and tries to reconcile these two aspects of his identity, which, as I mentioned at that time, were very difficult to harmonize, especially in the public sphere. And one of the mediums of that is his Orientalism, where from a very early age, Heine actually identified very strongly with the Orient, the Jews at that time being encoded as an Oriental people. So that we have in his work actually a type of communication or openness to the Oriental, and a use of the Oriental and identification with the Oriental to question the West. And this occurs in two ways. In one way, it's very political. Heine is perhaps the only poet of the time to write an ode to an Algerian resistance fighter who's fighting, as he puts it, against the Franks, where Heine saw himself engaged in a similar struggle with an exclusive and racially and religiously based German nationalism. And so you notice in this poem this double play where it could be about Heine, it applies equally to Heine as to the Algerian resistance fighter. And I think this poem is very singular in that sense, of a poem of that period with such a strong identification with an anti-colonial leader. On the other hand, there's a very poetic identification with the Orient, and Heine is a romantic, or he comes from Romanticism. And so the Orient, as the source of poetry, always remains untouched, unscathed in his work. Heine was otherwise a great ironizer, a great critic, a great deflator of illusions and projections. And what is extraordinary is that the Orient itself in Heine's work it remains inviolate. It is never deflated or ironized in the same way as, for example, all the other romantic projections of love or feeling are. It remains untouched, immaculate, as the land of poetry and the source of poetry. And Heine will express this firstly in his drama of youth, Almanzor, which is about the forced conversion of the Moors in 1492, and perhaps the only work of Western imaginative literature that is critical of the year 1492, and that puts the whole Western triumphalist project of expansion that begins in 1492 into question, because he sees the repressive side of that year, the forced conversion of the Moors and the Jews, the fall of Al-Andalus, which was a multicultural society where the Arabs and Islamic culture, the Christian and Hispanic culture, and indeed the Jewish and Hebraic culture had all flourished. And the death blow to that world is something that Heine protests against in this drama, and it has also a contemporary edge to it, because of course he's also referring to his forced conversion in the early 19th century in Germany. And this is of course the drama with the famous quote, "Where they burn books, they also burn people," which is of course a prophetic reference to the Nazi book burnings, but also a reference to the book burnings in Granada of the Inquisition and the book burnings of the German nationalists in 1817, which were quite contemporary with Heine's drama. So this is a kind of unique, I think, perspective that Heine opens up, not only on Germany, but on the whole Western world through his double status. At once as a Jewish Oriental person in his own self-conceptualization, and of course a very Western, cosmopolitan German and Parisian poet. And perhaps at the end of his career, this comes to a particular fruition where we have the most extreme and lush and luxuriant evocations of Oriental poetical existence, coupled with the most shocking, materialistic, crass depictions of what it is like to live in Paris. And these things are juxtaposed, and here we see that for Heine the Oriental space is almost like a life belt that saves him from just thinking as a poet into a world of the pure money economy and purely prosaic interest, or as Hegel called it, the age of prose that had begun around 1830 and proceeded really from Paris, from the Paris of the epoch of Balzac and Louis Philippe. So finally I would like to say that what I think is extraordinary about Heine and exemplary is his ultimate refusal to assume a single fixed identity. Hannah Arendt once named him the only successful example of Jewish assimilation in German literature and history, and I think what she meant by that was he did not deny his Jewishness by being a German or attempt to deny it. He rather managed to incorporate both aspects and to actually take on a multiple and fluid identity. And I think that's the thing we can most learn from him today, is that we don't have to accept rigid and exclusive definitions of our identities. We can take on fluid and open identities while at the same time, as it were, remaining who we are and becoming who we are by doing so. And in that sense, again, I think Heine was a very exemplary modern existence.